and I want to thank you all for tuning in. While the Tribune has paused our in-person events, we're moving the conversation here online with our ongoing series of virtual interviews. I'm here today with J.B. Milliken, Chancellor of the University of Texas System, and we'll be discussing the effect of the current coronavirus outbreak and the effects it's having on higher education until about 12:45 this afternoon. Chancellor Milliken and I will be also going over questions submitted by our readers throughout this conversation. First, we want to thank our sponsors for supporting today's conversation. Of course, Ascension Seton, AT&T, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Texas, Educate Texas, Texas 2036, Texas Education Grantmakers Advocacy Coalition, and the University of Texas at Arlington. We also want to thank KXAN, Community Impact, and KPRC2 for their media support. Though donors and corporate sponsors underwrite our events, they play no role in determining the content, panelist, or line of questioning. All right, let's get started. Chancellor Milliken was named head of the University of Texas System in 2018. Previously, he served as Chancellor of City University of New York, President of the University of Nebraska, and Senior Vice President at the University of Carolina. Chancellor Milliken, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Alana. Glad to be here.
Our conversation is timely, of course, for several reasons. I'm sure you saw this morning that we learned Texas A&M Chancellor John Sharp held a call with his 11 campus presidents, telling them that they'd be back on campus with in-person classes and that football and other sports would resume. I know we previously reported that you plan to make an announcement about fall in early June, and just wondering if this ups your timeline or what you're looking at as far as that goes.
So we meet with our presidents many times a week now, and I'm talking to presidents around the country almost every day. And the conversation has changed over the last few weeks, and I would say most people are now convinced that the question isn't whether or not we'll open in the fall, it's how we'll open in the fall. And we'll do it in a way that is safe and healthy for our students, our faculty, our staff, and visitors to the campus. So we will be watching and listening and working with the governor and his strike force, Harrison Keller, who's chairing a higher ed working group for that strike force. And we're meeting with our Board of Regents in a week. This is a huge decision, and it's one that we're going to want to work closely with the leadership of the state on. But I think it's pretty clear that from talking to each of my presidents, from talking to board members, and from talking to colleagues around the country, that we will be open in the fall. Won't be entirely like last fall, but it won't be like this spring either.
What about when it comes to sports? Do you foresee a football season there?
Sports are maybe the only thing above the chancellor's pay grade. It takes two to engage in sports, and these will be decisions that the NCAA and the conferences are involved in. Our athletic directors across the system are talking about this every day and working with their colleagues. Everybody wants to restart as much of that fabulous college and university experience as we can. But we're going to do it in a way that's safe and that's healthy and that protects our community members both on the campus and off.
Speaking of the NCAA, I'm sure you saw the New York Times this morning, or the news yesterday that came out, that the Board of Governors of the NCAA announced that it would support rule changes allowing athletes to earn money from the use of their names, images, and likeness. Such changes would take effect, providing everything goes as planned, at the start of the 2021-22 academic year. Your thoughts?
Well, I think this is a positive change, and I'm supportive of the changes that they're making. And this is one thing that's probably not affected by coronavirus.
Yeah, but I mean, the deals would have to come from third parties, so athletes wouldn't be considered university employees. Talk about kind of that dynamic.
So this is not an area that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and so I'm going to let other people work this out. We've got great people working in each of our athletic departments, leading them, and presidents who serve on the NCAA governing bodies. So, it's an adjustment, it's a change, it's a gradual one in terms of how athletes are rewarded, but it's been in the works for some time.
Lots of questions about how fall semester will work. A woman named Bianca wrote in asking how COVID-19 will affect admission and tuition for incoming freshmen, transfer, and current students.
Yeah. So we talk about these issues every day, and we want as much of that wonderful experience as we can have, but we also have to structure classes, gatherings, to comply with health orders and to be as safe as possible. So there'll be changes on the campus. Large gatherings probably won't happen in the same way that they did last year or the years before. We're going to be looking at all kinds of questions regarding the financing of higher education and what we can do to make sure that our students are able to attend and persist. This summer, for instance, we're online completely, just like the spring. And a number of our campuses have discounted tuition this summer for online students, just in part to encourage those students to continue to persist and to use this opportunity when in some cases the job market may be drying up a little bit for those students for summer employment, to get some credits under their belt so that they can advance more quickly towards graduation. So there are a lot of factors here, but paramount is how we can continue the progress in Texas to educate more students and provide them with the access they need and the opportunities to graduate.
A couple follow-ups there. I mean, you are such a big system. Do you see a one-size-fits-all, or if one campus, say, hasn't seen, or that area of the state hasn't seen any COVID-19 cases or not very many, will you maybe open up more? Do you foresee kind of a piecemeal approach?
So there are a lot of differences among our campuses, and some of them weigh into some budget decisions probably as much as anything, and we can talk about that. But often it isn't one size fits all. Now, in this decision, our campuses in the West are probably a week or two behind the campuses in the East in terms of the progress of COVID incidents. But at the end of the day, that probably will not affect decisions on fall opening.
Okay. You talk about accessibility. You have a history of making that a priority as far as closing the achievement gaps and whatnot. We know from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, a survey, that those without internet or computer access are already behind academically. How are you ensuring that students working remotely have access to both computers and internet to continue learning?
Right. So this is one of the big concerns that I have. I mean, it's hard to overstate the impact of coronavirus and the illness, the unfortunate deaths that we've had, the complete disruption of the economy. But on the other hand, there are I think some positives that will come out of this in the future. And one of them is an increasing comfort level with the use of technology in education, which is going to be one of the ways, I think, in Texas, with our population projected to maybe double over 30 years, that's going to be one of the ways that we accommodate a greatly increased number of students. Now, that's the plus side. On the other side, there was a story by Ross Ramsey a couple of weeks ago about the digital divide in Texas and how it impacts education and and work and other opportunities. So a third of Texas households still don't have access, either because they lack the hardware or the connectivity to solid broadband availability for computing. So that's a significant issue that the state has, and I hope that any infrastructure investments that we're talking about coming out of this recognize that as we continue to use more and more technology in all areas of society, but particularly in education, we have to make sure that that digital divide is narrowed significantly and then closed, because we can't have a situation where the natural differences already in terms of wealth and preparation of students are exacerbated by that.
How is UT addressing those students who have expressed hardships in this area?
Well, a number of ways. The Austin campus immediately provided 700 laptops to students who didn't have them at the beginning of the pivot to online. At some of our other campuses, we also provided laptops either as donations or as loaners. At others, we set aside hotspots in the community and had safely distanced computer labs for students to use. Each of the 14 campuses has established a private fundraising opportunity for relief, for emergency relief for students. And the system has contributed to that to help match contributions that they would get. Plus, the CARES Act will help us with this as well.
We'll get to that in a moment. Yeah, real quick though, before we move on, from spring semester, summer, how will commencements work? Do we know exactly how those are going to play out? I know a lot of students really want to walk across that stage, but what's the reality?
Yeah, so we announced on the 17th of March, based on the CDC recommendations and the talking with our board and our presidents, that a number of things. One is that we were going to go online 100%. And we did that within a week or 2 weeks' time, depending on the institution. Two, that we weren't going to have the kinds of commencement ceremonies in the spring that we've had in the past. And that's a huge disappointment. I know as a father of a senior in college that's a huge disappointment. And I hope that we will have some rewarding virtual ceremonies this spring. And then we'll find other opportunities. Each of our campuses is talking about opportunities in the fall with their incoming commencements, convocations, or other opportunities later to bring these graduates back so the graduates and their families can celebrate. I will tell you that I just participated last week in the Archer program, which is a system-wide program, just a terrific program where students work in Washington for a semester and they have a commencement. And we were able to have all 50 students on that, and Congressman Archer and others participate. It was a fun ceremony, although on Zoom. In a week or two, we're going to do the first graduation ceremony at UT-RGV's College of Medicine, their first one, their graduating class, and that'll be terrific. There are some opportunities that we have with regard to events over this huge state that we can participate in now when it's virtual that we didn't have otherwise. I know it's not a substitute, and I would never suggest that, but there are some opportunities.
You mentioned the CARES Act. Let's talk about the financial situation, the health of the UT system. Our Shannon Najmabadi listed off maybe some of your financial losses as a result of this, the cancellation of all spring athletics, millions of dollars in reimbursements for unused services like housing, parking, and voided study abroad programs. As of April 1, UT Austin had issued, $22 million worth of refunds for housing alone. But you also received the system some $173 million almost from the CARES Act. UT has the second largest endowment in the country. I'm sure you saw the headlines last week with Harvard being the largest endowment, wanting to face some backlash, so they're dedicating their entire allotment to financial aid. Will UT follow suit, or do you know how that money will be spent?
I have some idea how it will be spent. So there was about $1 billion from the CARE Act that will come eventually to Texas higher education institutions, and the UT system about a little over 170 million of that. Half of that funding will be used for emergency grants to students, and that's underway now. The Department of Education is still issuing some guidelines, and we'll wait for those so that we be sure we spend the money as Congress and the department intends. But at each of our institutions, we have plans developed now to issue payments to students immediately so that those in the greatest financial need will get some assistance right now. So that's half the money we'll get. That's $86 million. The second half will come for institutional purposes, and that hasn't been determined yet. There isn't complete guidance, I don't believe, from the Department of Education yet. And we'll be talking to our Board of Regents about how each of our institutions will use that half of the funding. But you mentioned the reimbursements. That's another thing that we announced on the 17th of March, early on in this process, that we were going to refund the major auxiliary expenses, residence halls, dining, parking, that students weren't allowed to use because they weren't allowed to return to campus. Now, if you take UT Austin, for example, they've already spent considerably more in terms of refunds than they will be eligible to receive in the institutional funds from the CARES Act. So we're not going to come out ahead because of the CARES Act. It is a welcome assistance, but it's not going to put any of our institutions back on their expectations for their budget this year.
We know much of your endowment, of course, is fulfilled by, they call it the oil fund, or obviously the oil production. With those numbers hurting, how does that affect your bottom line overall?
Well, I'll say something about that, but if I can go back just 1 minute, in regard to your last question, I don't think I answered it entirely. The endowments that Harvard got received a lot of attention. So a couple of those institutions have returned them. One thing I think is important for people to recognize is that the UT system and the endowment we have, which is a wonderful asset. We have 240,000 students, and the funds per capita, or endowment per capita, which is one way of looking at this, is about 160,000 in our system. It's about 1.6 million at the institutions with the largest endowments in the country. If you take Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, Yale, all the Pell Grant students they have is about 4,000 or 5,000. It's 80,000 at the University of Texas system. So we're serving a different population. I think a population that the Congress and the administration is trying to provide relief to. And believe me, those funds will be well used, and those students who benefit from them will be deserving. With regard to the permanent university fund, the lands, the university lands in the Permian Basin that serve to support the University of Texas system and Texas A&M University. It's a great resource, a terrific resource, always been a true advantage for Texas, but it will be affected. And not just by COVID, of course, but by what's been going on in the oil industry over the past month. That will be a significant impact. We estimate that the University Lands Division, which last year transferred over $1 billion to the university systems for management of its funds, will transfer less than half of that amount next year. So it will be a significant impact on our university system and on Texas A&M. Speaking of,
staying with the financial questioning, of course, football and sports is a huge moneymaker for universities. I'm a University of Florida Gator, so I know the importance of college sports and what it does for universities. I mean, are you taking that moneymaker, if you will, into account when deciding exactly how and if football will return in the fall? We're just getting a lot of audience questions, people interested in that aspect of fall semester.
Well, of course, it's hugely important. And this is something that there's great variability across our 8 academic institutions. And last time I checked, our 6 health-related institutions weren't fielding much of a football team. And UT Austin, of course, is one of the most profitable athletic enterprises in the country. And of course that's important, but it's nowhere near as important as the health and safety of our students and our visitors to our institutions. So while we are thinking about all the time all the dimensions of the budget impacts on the university system, we continue to have paramount the concern with health and safety.
Are you looking then to get creative? And I know we've talked about, or we've heard about a lot of sports holding the sports without audiences or without people in the stadium. It's kind of hard to imagine, but that's the times it seems we're living in.
Well, I heard the other day that Major League Baseball is talking about that, and I know soccer is talking about it, professional soccer. And believe me, the athletic directors and coaches, as well as the presidents and the people on my team, are thinking every day about every possible permutation of how we will reopen, how quickly we will reopen, and how completely we will reopen. But I can assure everyone that this is an issue of enormous importance to us, and we know how important it is to our students and the university community and to all Texans.
Yeah, Longhorns worldwide will be watching, I'm sure.
Right.
You mentioned UT Austin, of course, among your meetings, I'm sure, is planning for the new leadership there. We know Greg Fenves is leaving for Emory University. What is that process like, and what are you looking at there?
Well, so we have actually three campuses now with interim leadership, UT Austin, the most recent, but also UT Arlington and UT Medical Branch. And so we've already launched a search at the medical branch, but we put it on a bit of a pause right now in the last few weeks because everyone is focused, not just here, but across the country. So in these searches, we want to make sure that we get the attention of the best candidates everywhere and that we're able to attract them to our institutions at Texas. So we're going to do this in a way and according to a timetable that allows us to do that. So we won't be out this week looking for candidates for presidencies at any of our institutions. We're going to take a little bit of a breather right now and allow our folks and the folks who would be candidates from around the country to devote their total attention to what's going on at their institutions because of the impact of COVID.
Of course, that new president will be overseeing a new model of education. Daniel asks, do you believe that brick-and-mortar education will be permanently adjusted to online going forward?
Well, so I mentioned that there are, possibly some silver linings or some opportunities here. And I do think that one of them is that this is one of, I think, the disruptive moments in higher education that has been promised for 20 years or predicted. And it really hasn't happened in a broad way. I do think this is the beginning of a different way of thinking about it because of necessity. And so the fall, as we talked about, will look different than last fall. I do believe now we have had every faculty member engaged in some way in remote teaching and every student engaged in it. That's a huge change. We will find out much more about what works well and what doesn't work well and people are comfortable with. So that'll be a change. We've also found out by necessity, along with everyone else, that certain kinds of remote working for employees is much more productive maybe than we had thought it would be. And so I think we'll see an impact not just in higher education, but in all organizations where, our real estate footprint may look a little different in the future. One of the issues that universities have grappled with for ages is the space utilization of its facilities. These are large, expensive facilities, and often at some universities they aren't used as extensively as they could be. Well, I think when we come back in the fall and start talking about social distancing, we're going to be spreading people out over more time and using facilities differently. And that'll have some, I think, benefits for us in the future as we are looking to accommodate a much larger number of Texans. The state relaxed its rules on telemedicine, which has been enormously helpful for our institutions and others to be able to see patients around the state who couldn't travel. And I think that's, as we get more comfortable with that, and the quality of that, and the regulators understand it and are comfortable with the quality, that's another benefit that we will see come out of this.
What about testing? A lot of what's been written and proven in other states and other countries is that the key to reopening or relaxing rules is just access to testing. Can you tell me how many employees or staff there at UT and the UT system have been tested and kind of what levels you want to see ahead of a fall decision?
Well, I can't give you a number on the number of people that have been tested now because tests are largely reserved for people who have some symptoms or who have some reason otherwise to have a test because of their work. And our employees, for the most part, are almost entirely working from home now. Now, we do a lot of the testing. I mean, at UTMB, for instance, they can do 1,800 tests a day. And probably 6 or 7, 8 of our institutions are doing tests right now, some among the major testers in their community. So that's going to be important. And we're going to continue to learn between now and the fall about what we need to do. But we do think right now we know that businesses that have opened, manufacturing entities that have opened in other places, for instance, because their employees have to be present to do their work. They have temperature tests when they come into the plant. If they're symptomatic, then they're tested again. And if they have any symptoms, they're isolated. People right now who are working in Texas, who are essential workers, they have their temperature checked. There are rules in the buildings about isolation. They're asked a series of questions about, where they've been, so that they can be assessing whether or not there's risk of infection. We can't control what everyone does when they're off campus, but we can do everything in our power to make sure that we are not doing anything that would possibly spread infection from our campus, outside of it, or within the campus.
Of course, your other role in this, and you alluded to it, is you're the #1 healthcare worker educator in the state, preparing the people on the front lines who are fighting this pandemic. What has that aspect of the UT system look like during this time?
So I started having calls in mid-March about every other day with the academic presidents and then the health presidents alternating. And it's a very different kinds of conversations, as you could imagine. I mean, what the health presidents were concerned with immediately was how they free up hospital capacity for COVID patients. And so they immediately, under the governor's orders and in conjunction with every other hospital in the state, started eliminating elective or non-COVID related surgery. So that had an enormous financial impact on us, estimated between $10 and $15 million a day of lost revenue, maybe $500 million to $1 billion in lost revenue for the year when we finish this up. The recent relaxation by Governor Abbott is welcome and I think appropriate under the circumstances, given how many COVID patients Texas has seen. So we're still maintaining some capacity, but at each of our institutions, we've now started doing other surgeries, which, while referred to as elective, in some cases can be urgent. You're talking about cancer surgery, heart surgery, other issues where we need to take care of the whole population, and going forward, we need to have the protections in place, the protocols in place, the testing in place to be able to do both things at once, to be able to maintain capacity for COVID, which we're doing now, but also maintain the ability to treat other Texans. And at the same time, we've continued to educate students. Some of our institutions have accelerated their graduation for health professionals like MDs so that they could be out, those who wanted to be in the front lines working earlier. That's hugely important. But I think one of the things that people will see out of this is just how important our institutions, like the University of Texas institutions, are to the state. We train over half the residents in the state, and it's essential that we continue to operate at least the speed we're doing now so that we can continue to provide the health care that Texans need in the future.
On the research end, I had the chance to talk with Jason McClellan at UT Austin in the McClellan Lab. At the start of this, I got some flack because I think we shook hands in the video, and that was before, the times of social distancing and everything else. But, just about their breakthrough and what they did to map a key part of the virus to be able to accelerate vaccine development and sharing that information with labs around the world. Talk about what's afoot there. I know he said they're not working on a vaccine specifically, but looking at other treatments, antibodies, and things like that.
So there are a whole bunch of different kinds of research projects. First of all, we shut down most non-COVID related research at our institutions just to make sure that we're keeping people safe. So there's been pretty much a lockdown on much of that. But there are, I think last count, over 130 different research projects going on across the system with regard to vaccines and treatments, different kinds of treatments. There's a lot of modeling going on, including at UT Austin, which is being used nationally so that we can get the public health information we need as quickly as we need it, and so that public officials can act on it. But I'm really pleased, and I believe that some of our faculty who are engaged in this COVID research right now, I mean, we all hope for a vaccine as early as possible, and we all hope and have recently seen some promising results relating to treatments. But I think we'll be very much involved in that. We'll have researchers who are on the cutting edge of that work and in doing the clinical trials to support its eventual approval.
Do you foresee treatment or, I guess, a widespread accepted treatment in the scientific world ahead of fall semester? The governor's kind of expressed as so much when asked about whether or not kids will be returning in K through 12 here.
Yeah, well, we're all hopeful about that, and as I said in the last week, we've seen some very positive news about treatments, and we continue to hear about new ideas for treatments that are being pursued by drug companies and universities. So we're all hopeful for that. And it's likely that a treatment will be developed that will serve a large number of members of the population before a vaccine will be approved. So that'll be an important next step in our ability to return to what we have thought of as completely normal.
You mentioned that much of the non-COVID research has been shut down just for safety reasons, but I guess who is left on campus? If we were to drive here in Austin on the drag, or who would we see driving through campus?
Hopefully very few people, but that'll change. I mean, first of all, we were deemed an essential service, an essential operation from the beginning, but also encouraged by the governor and the CDC and others to work from home when possible. So that was our guidance. So there are security professionals, there are facilities professionals, there are IT infrastructure people there. We still have some students on our campuses because on the 17th of March, when we announced that we would close all university residences to students, except for those who had no reasonable alternative. And so at our campuses that have residential students, each of those has some level of students there now who, for one reason or another, they might have been international students who couldn't return home. They might have been foster youth who had left their foster homes and didn't have a place to return. So we have continued to accommodate those students in a way that is safe, socially distant. We provided meals in a safe way, that kind of thing. So there is still some activity on every campus. And you will begin to see now, with the relaxation in the state's guidelines from the strike force and the governor, that we will be moving people back over time in a careful and gradual way, and continuing to follow all the guidance that's available to us.
We have a question from a viewer. A guy named Chris asks, economic and campus disruptions might push bachelor-bound students to community colleges in the fall. How can transfer partnerships be strengthened? Is that something that's being considered?
So I'm on a national task force on strengthening the transfer processes across the country. I am a huge believer in this. I believe it is one of the ways that we are going to serve Texas in the future. If our population doubles and the number of college-going or college-eligible students doubles, we can't accommodate them today, and we're not going to replicate the existing structure. We're not going to double it in size. We will not. This is I'll give this away. We're not going to have 28 institutions of the University of Texas system then, because the population doubles. We're going to have to do a lot of things differently. We're going to have more early high school, whether it's dual credit or early college or AP, so that people are getting more credits in high school. And we're going to have much better articulation between community colleges and universities. Now, it's too soon to see what the impact will be on enrollments this summer and this fall. We're already looking across the university system, and I know some other Texas institutions are experiencing the same thing, where enrollment's actually going to be up this summer. And we don't know yet what fall will look like. But I saw some recent polling that said 30% of millennials asked thought they would have to go back to school to retool for the economy coming out of the COVID pandemic. So I don't think there's going to be any diminution of demand on college. I do think that we'll see more community college enrollments, in large part because of disruption in the economy, not necessarily traditional student populations. Whenever we have seen a recession in this country, we have seen college enrollment, and particularly community college enrollment, go up. So I think we may see that natural trend where people may be out of a job, maybe furloughed or laid off, and they are using that time to advance their skills. Or we're just going to see an increasing amount of retooling in the economy, where workers believe that, and I think rightly, that there are going to be some changes in the economy with artificial intelligence and robotics, that they need to retool and reskill to be prepared for a better job.
You mentioned fall enrollment, and Lewis asks, will football be permitted if students are now not allowed on campus in fall? Will one hinge on the other?
Yeah, that's not exactly an either-or question. I mean, things may be different. Things will be different even when students are on campus. So we can't. It's too early to say on that. And I think we talked about this. We all want to see football and everything and all the other stuff that comes with it. But we're going to do all these decisions will be made in a way to keep people safe.
I mean, how many, what percentage would you say of your discussions are about football right now? I mean, obviously there are many important issues you're tackling here at the head of the system, but I guess how much of that consumes your conversations?
Well, my conversations, very little. My presidents, President Fembase, of course, other presidents who have football teams and programs, considerably more of theirs. And their athletic directors are thinking of very little else right now.
Nicole asks, with a percentage of 2020 freshmen possibly deferring their start until fall of 2021, how will that impact fall 2021 acceptances or of applicants?
So this is a conversation that we're having with our presidents and that every institution across the country is thinking about. I was on a call yesterday with a few presidents of national universities where they raised the issue about limiting or precluding deferrals because of the impact it could have in 2021. Now, I don't know that anybody here is at that place yet, but that's something we're going to have to think about, how that will affect the next year's class. It's one of the reasons that most institutions are at the point of thinking about not whether they will open in the fall, but how to open in the fall and how we can provide the best possible experience, but still keeping people safe. And we focus a lot on the students, and we know that there is often less of an impact with COVID with the people in that typical age demographic. But we have a lot of faculty and staff who aren't in that demographic, and we have a lot of visitors to our campuses, to not just our sporting events, but our museums, our libraries, other just on campus. And we need to be thinking about all those populations and how we're going to structure this to keep them safe.
One question from Prentice. He asks, what will the UT system do? Obviously, a lot of people at the table in these decision making, if there's political pressure to open up more quickly than medical experts and epidemiologists believe is prudent.
So I don't really have a concern about that because I know, the governor has set up a strike force on reopening, and there are 4 physicians, and one of them is Dr. John Zerwas, who's the Executive Vice Chancellor for the university system. I have great confidence in the ability of that team of medical professionals. Also on our team, David Lakey, former health commissioner for the state, is a vice chancellor. And so we are getting the best information every day, I believe, that's available for our decision makers at the administrative level and for our board. But I also believe the governor is getting better information every day and than I am. And he is committed, has said publicly, and I've seen the evidence of this through the work of this strike force and particularly the team of physicians that's supporting it, that these decisions are going to be made based on the science. They're going to permit some flexibility at the local level and the institutional level. You know, we were given directives early on and then given the flexibility to manage that, which we've done at the institutional level. And I think we've done it very successfully. And I think that I look forward to that continuing. I have no reason to think it won't.
Final question, my curiosity, prior to being at UT, you were of course in New York, had seen severe devastation from this disease, from COVID-19. How have you been talking to former colleagues and how they've responded? How has that shaped your approach to managing this here at UT?
Yeah, well, you know, what's happened in New York is just incredibly unfortunate and just a catastrophe. And I talked to my former colleagues there quite a bit, and of course followed the news from there. I've lost a few former colleagues, some distinguished faculty members at the City University to COVID. And so it has really kind of brought home to me what happens if you don't take every precaution possible that's reasonable. You don't listen to the scientific and medical advice. I'm not saying they didn't. I'm just saying that we had a little bit of an advantage by having several weeks of delay where Governor Abbott and others could get the best teams around them and make the best decisions for the state. And I think that's been happening. And so, you know, I sympathize, empathize, mourn in some cases, with my friends in New York. And I hope that they are coming out of this, but they've been hit much harder than anyone else. And it's been a very, very difficult time there.
Sounds like you obviously have them in mind in approaching this matter. Here at UT, very different state than New York. As you said, we had time watching it play out on the coast before it got here. Right.
But you know, these pandemics are global, and you know, we know that with something like COVID, we are susceptible to it, and it will come. It's how well we prepare for it, we manage for it. We, as they say, flatten the curve and an ability so it doesn't overwhelm our healthcare system, which I believe we have done in Texas. We have not overwhelmed the system, and now we are ramping up our healthcare systems to treat other patients. So we're just in a much better place, and we're very fortunate because of that, and we've taken advantage of it.
You have a lot of confidence, it sounds like, in the current task force for coronavirus. You talk about flattening the curve, but with easing of restrictions starting tomorrow, are you nervous at all about the impact it could have on the health system here in Texas?
Well, you know, we can't continue to have a lockdown on society and the economy and life. That won't work, and I don't think anybody agrees with that. We have to find the right rhythm here. We have to find over time the right level of activity and how we continue to make sure that we aren't having a resurge of the COVID, and that when we do have some additional cases, we manage them appropriately. But from all evidence that I have, this is being very thoughtfully approached. And, you know, there are a lot of unknowns. There are a lot of unknowns with this. We are going to keep working on this every day. And as we talked about before, we hope that there's a treatment coming soon. and a vaccine on an accelerated schedule. Until that's done, until we have an effective treatment, and then eventually a vaccine, we are going to have to take things a step at a time and be managing this every day.
Chancellor, we'll have to have that as the last word. It is now 12:45 on the dot. We thank you all for so much for tuning in. And of course, thank you to Chancellor Milliken for joining us. Thanks to everyone who supported today's event. To help us continue hosting events like this one, you can donate to our nonprofit newsroom at texastribune.org/give. Have a good rest of the day. And thank you again, Chancellor.
Thank you.